I am going to welcome Peter back to the stage, and he's going to talk to us about the potential pitfalls and perils of attempting to restore the climate in the real world. So help me welcome Peter back to the stage.
Well, we're recovered from after lunch. It's been a great day, and thank you everyone for staying here. We've discussed a lot of topics, and I always introduce myself as a physicist who loves doing the numbers. And let's see, can we get my notes up here? There we go. Great. Yesterday at lunch, General Petraeus gave us a talk, and he talked about the critical thing in any major project is getting the big idea right. And of course, he was looking at the Iraq War, where he was active, and so on. For us, the big idea is giving our children a safe climate, or whatever the variation is, as Hunter said. And just look. So we're looking at humanity and nature flourishing for millennia to come. And I've been looking at that for about a year and realized that over the last 50 years, I had been expecting government to take care of things for us, and it didn't. It's not in the job description of the government to worry about what the planet's going to look like. It was not an issue in 1776 or whatever country you happen to be from, whatever year they were established. It's only been an issue making sure that our children have a safe planet to live on in the last 20 years. If you think about it, at the 25 now. Think back to 1999 or 2000 and think about the conversations people around you had about global warming. Even for someone like me who knew the physics, it was still theoretical. So what do we know now? So we've talked about ocean fertilization. We talked about the cost. What we need to do, we need to look at what are the challenges we have going forward, and so we know that global warming is a function of CO2, and there's lots of other things. There are right, as Hunter says, there are other greenhouse gases, but normally I show the graph that Jim Hansen shows about CO2, and temperature and CO2 go up hand in hand, almost exactly together. If we don't deal with CO2, nothing else we do is going to make any difference. Now, it doesn't mean we shouldn't take care of ending emissions. It doesn't mean that we're not going to do regenerative agriculture. It just means that, I think it was Hunter who said, first we have to make sure we take care of the CO2, and it's not yet on the public agenda. I mean, even at this conference, yes, there's energy transition, but energy transition will not reduce CO2 levels. And anyways, so that's the first thing, is we have to realize that there's lots of other stuff, but if we want our lives to make a difference, if we want our children to have a planet, we have to get everyone watching the CO2 levels. And part of that, of course, means measuring it. And as I mentioned in the OIF talk, that we're beginning to work with JPL and their Orbiting Carbon Observatory to expand the measurement of CO2 on the planet, so you can actually monitor. Eventually, the goal is to monitor daily CO2 removal, because ocean fertilization, when it happens rapidly in days. And so if you don't monitor it daily, you can't control it. If you can't control it, it's not going to happen. So what else do we know? We know that nature has performed climate restoration many times, before the ice ages. So we don't have to worry about, can it be done? The question is, are we going to spread the message so that the funders are confident that their reputation will be intact when they do it? And I'll say it again, that the real issue is, are we going to empower the conversation so that funders, so Bill Gates and Michael Bloomberg and Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, they're passionate about the climate. But the climate is all about, the conversation has been all about the energy system. And if you read, I think they've all written books. I think every single one of those books has been about energy, with not one discussion about CO2 levels. Bill Gates, he was at Harvard when I was at MIT, so I have a certain affinity for him. And he's a smart guy. It's not like he doesn't know that climate is about CO2. This is not news. But we need to make that news out there in order to overcome the past, in order to have a victory over the past. Because it was about, a lot of us gray hairs here. In the 1970s, the oil companies were working on climate. They were way ahead on wind power, on solar power, on batteries. They were going ahead because they wanted to have customers. That changed in 1980 with the Reagan administration, and the universe, I'm not going to blame Reagan because it wasn't his decision, but the universe decided that climate would become political. He took the panels off the White House, and everything was stuck in stone. Well, it's been 45 years, and it's time to change. We can do that. I mean, the fact that we have this many people in this room tells us that we can communicate and make it happen. I'm looking at Paul, who's at Woods Hole. A year ago, I talked to the president of MIT and had this conversation with her. And in part of the MIT climate work now that she created was a mission to restore the atmosphere. And so the point is we can do it. Now, on the one hand, they now have a mission to restore the atmosphere. On the other hand, to my knowledge, they still don't have anyone to lead it because it's such a new conversation. There's no faculty in a position to do it. But the position is there. Again, my details are wrong for sure. I just don't have intimate access. Again, the point is, it's our job to make it acceptable, to make it so a professor at MIT could say, you know what? I'm going to make it my career to start to do the research to restore a safe atmosphere so my grandkids, our grandkids can get the job done, can have a CO2 level that humans have actually survived and will survive. So what are the challenges going ahead now? We've got, well, as I mentioned, measuring CO2, getting the CO2 satellites. This is going well. There's a lot of action going here. So you may have heard that last June, the EDF launched a methane sat, which they're very proud of. At first, I rolled my eyes. I said, that's just what we need, finding more methane leaks, like that's going to change the climate. Well, it turns out that the designers of the satellite contacted me and said, hey, can we do some more work for you? It turns out that satellite can also measure CO2 very accurately. And so the diagram that Alan showed with our orbiting carbon observatory, the new satellite, once they finish the software, because they're still developing the software to get the data, can do 20 times more data on CO2, as well as the methane. And then if we get 5 more of those satellites, we would then have daily updates on CO2 coverage. And if those of us around my age, if you have a speedometer in a car, you're going to have some guys and some gals, but especially guys, racing those damn cars. That's what happens when you have a speedometer. If we have daily coverage of CO2 removal, you will not be able to stop the guys and the gals from seeing how fast they can reduce atmospheric CO2. And the thing to remember is, scientifically, it's not very interesting. The science is in the ocean, is how much carbon gets onto the seafloor. That doesn't affect the climate. That's really important science. But what affects the climate is the CO2 in the air. So the funding. How did we fund this? And there's been a lot of discussion. And Carol and I wrote our book 4 years ago, I think, is when we started work on it. And we were optimistic that we could do fishery, that we could get fisheries to pay for it, and do other mechanisms. And as time goes on and we talk to people who tried selling OIF to fisheries, and a lot of people have tried selling OIF to fisheries, every time it didn't work. Because the fishery families said, now wait a minute, I'm going to do this work and my competitor is going to earn money? No. Now, at first, the first time I heard it, I thought it was a fluke. But the third time I heard the exact same story in different parts of the world, I realized probably there's a trend there. And so we know that the beneficiaries of climate restoration are our children. You know, a lot of us have grandchildren. I love talking to these rooms where a lot of us are gray hairs. And you know, our grandchildren don't have any money, but we as the elders, a lot of us do. And a lot of, you know, if you don't, then you have friends who have money. And there's nothing that we as grandparents want to do more than take care of our grandkids. Most people I know who have grandkids, you know, if it would make a real difference and not spoil them rotten, they would do it. So the funding approach that's beginning to form is to get a coalition of 5 or a dozen families. A family that has a lot of money, like, you know, owns a supermarket, has $50 million. They're called a family office because they have an office which manages the investment and the philanthropy. And so the idea is to get a group of 5 or 15 family offices to make a high integrity coalition that they're going to, for the next 20 years, they're going to give the base funding for restoring the climate. So it's not about who can make a profit. It's like we're going to invest in it. And with the satellites, you know, it's not difficult at that point for them to guarantee that they're actually producing the result they want. It's not hypothetical. Again, it turns out to be overall quite simple. Because there are families, again, I don't know much about the Gates family, but I know that they're very data interested. They do not invest in things that they can't account for the results. So imagine a coalition who commit to, say, a third of what's required. And people call me an optimist, but when I game out the cost of doing ocean fertilization, it comes out to naively $1 billion a year. People say, listen, call it $10 billion a year because there's always things you didn't expect. In either case, it's a quantity that it comes out to $1 billion a year is a penny a person a day in the U.S. just to put it in scale. So getting a few billionaires involved to do that is really quite easy. But we need to have the universal involvement. So it's not going to work for 5 families to restore the climate. No one's going to trust it. But they can say, we're going to provide the baseline. And then some governments will come in. California will come in until we become Republican. Or, the U.S. will come in at some point, but leave. The point is, there will be other people who get involved. Microsoft is a big funder of carbon removal right now, but because it fits their business model. They're still accountable to their shareholders, and at some point, it'll stop fitting their business model and they'll stop their funding. But that's okay. So a baseline of a coalition of family offices, and then with super high integrity, making rules that you've got to do this, that, and the other to join the club. And then it just becomes a matter of pride. And then if another family wants to come in and say, listen, our family, we've made good money, we will owe it back, and we want to be known, we want the world to know that successful families contribute to the world, they can get in if they cross whatever hurdle, whatever integrity hurdle is made. Make it FOMO, fear of missing out, that the wealthy families who really want to make a difference, that they have to work hard for that. And raising the $100 billion, 10 or $100 billion, then actually becomes very easy and reliable. The key is, if we want a climate restoration industry, but an industry needs to have a long-term business plan. And carbon, those of you who know what carbon credits are and carbon offsets know that that is not a long-term solution, because it depends on which way the winds go. And of course, right now, people don't want to buy these carbon credits for the most part. So we get a coalition of family offices, some corporations, because there's always going to be a corporation. I always look at Microsoft and I say, well, of course they're doing a lot of climate work, because Apple, one of their main competitors, has a sort of wholesome reputation already. And so it makes sense for Microsoft to nurture that. So have a flux of companies coming in and going out, flux of governments coming in and going out. Someone said, well, how about Saudi Arabia? They have a lot of money. Well, they'll put money in some year, but at a certain point, the government is going to change and they'll stop. So it's who has children? Well, it's people. Companies don't have children. Corporations don't have children. Foundations don't have children. They'll contribute, but you can't. Our children aren't going to depend on that. So safety. How do we ensure safety? How do we make sure? Well, let me back up before I do safety. So the numbers count. So I recommend you remember this little model, that the maximum amount of money that the world is ever going to give for restoring the climate, we're never going to take the Pentagon budget and put that into the climate, right? That's not going to happen. That's $1 trillion. So that's the upper ceiling. Realistically, a tenth of that is actually fairly reasonable. $100 billion is something that a coalition of several dozen billionaires could and absolutely would do. So if you say the maximum budget is $100 billion, and we need to remove about 100 billion tons per year. I don't know how good your math is. If you divide $100 billion by 100 billion, oh, not you, you know your math. But people who aren't good at math, $100 billion divided by 100 billion tons is $1 per ton. And so the only method that's ever going to restore the climate has to be $1 a ton or less. Anything above that is great. Direct air capture is fantastic for the oil companies. They need the CO2. The regenerative agriculture is great because farmers need regenerative agriculture. It's not saying we shouldn't do these other things, but when it comes to restoring the climate, we want to keep our eye on the ball. And so with ocean fertilization, that's the only thing which can possibly be done for $1 a ton or less. My calculation is a penny a ton, but it doesn't make any difference if it's a penny a ton or $1 a ton. Either one is totally doable. And even if it's $10 a ton, that's still barely doable. So then how do we make it safe? Well, the first thing is remember that nature's been doing it for millions of years, and there's no data suggesting that there's problems with it. Like anything, like any weather phenomenon, things are better and worse, but there's no reason to expect a failure. And then when it comes to, the question is, okay, if you do this impact in an area of the ocean, how do you know it's safe in that part of the ocean? Well, you may remember from 7th grade biology about indicator species. In an environment, if you want to know how the environment is doing, you pick 2 or 3 indicator species and just monitor them. Now that's already being done in the ocean. Every single country that has oceans has groups that monitor the indicator species so they know when to stop fishing and so on. It's already done. There's people saying, oh my God, how do we do it? The data is there. We just have to get started. When I first learned, actually, Carol pointed that out to me just a few months ago. It's like, oh, thank God for people who go beyond physics. Then finally, governance. anything has to be managed. And there's no government on the planet that has taken accountability, that says we're going to be accountable to anyone for the future of our planet. The UN sounds like it, but if you look at it, they're accountable for peace, they're accountable for sustainable development, and development means economics, GDP growth. Again, it doesn't matter if you like it or not, that's just the lay of the land. So it's likely to be that the governance is going to come from that coalition of family offices who said, we're going to be accountable publicly to the planet to make sure the funding happens. We'll provide a third of it maybe, and we'll make sure that there's, I call it marketing. Carol said, don't call it marketing, it sounds like someone wants to make a profit. But you could call it advertising, but that doesn't feel right to me. So, but that the coalition will do just use my word, marketing, to make sure that people say, oh my God, I'm so glad that these groups are working together to assure that our common children have a planet that sustains human life. And just be accountable. And then the last part of that is what the First Nations call free, prior, and informed consent. That if you have friends, and I think all of you have friends, if you surprise them, if you show up unexpected, to stay overnight, they may take offense because they weren't expecting it. Don't surprise anyone. So and a critical part about governance is making sure that all the stakeholders are informed. Now, there's a tradition in OIF for many, many years, for many decades, to do it secretly. Because people who implemented had been afraid that if someone knew what they were doing, they would be stopped. Well, of course, once the news got out that they were doing it, then the people who weren't informed say, wait a minute, if you were on our side, you would have told us in advance. Since you didn't tell us in advance, you must be our enemy. So free, prior, informed consent. It's easy. You tell people what you're doing, and you convene them to discuss it. Yes, it's a lot of work, but if you don't do it, you're guaranteed to fail. And I know that I've been involved with people working in the ocean fertilization field for many, many, many years. That's the biggest fear, that something terrible will happen. So just to wrap up, the base funding has to come from stakeholders. It can't come from companies who don't have children, or governments who don't have children. Even foundations don't have children. The base funding has to come from stakeholders. There has to be a marketing strategy. That is, unless this group, this or a different group of people says, we're going to make sure that the world hears news reports about restoring the climate. If we don't get those news reports out, then people won't know. And we'll be stuck with the 45 or 50 people we have in the room here. Well, that's not going to happen. But a marketing campaign is critical. Free, prior, informed consent. If you don't do it, guaranteed to fail. But it's easy to do once you decide we're going to be open about it. Accurate CO2 measurement is critical. Atmospheric. Yes, we can measure CO2 underground, we can measure carbon in the ocean, we can measure carbon in all sorts of places, and that should be done. Science is good. But if we don't measure the carbon, the CO2 in the atmosphere, that's where the climate is. And so that needs to be done. I asked the company that made the EDF satellite, and it would be, to get the daily reports would be about $400 million in addition to what EDF already put in. Which it's more money than I've got, but if you're a billionaire, that's half a year's work. And then as I said, once we have those measurements, you won't be able to stop the young men and women from implementing it. So get those satellites up ASAP. And then finally, work together, build alliances. One of the things I've noticed when I first started out on this about 15 years ago, I can't remember the language I used, but it was a little bit divisive. I said, stop worrying so much about the energy transition because we have to worry about the CO2. And that was a divisive statement. I created enemies. I think they've all forgiven me since then. But Since then, I just address it as we all want to give our children a safe climate. And I've said that thousands of times and had exactly 0 people say, I don't think so. And so we have to remember there actually aren't any enemies. The enemies that we think we have are the ones that we create by accidentally creating them, as I used to do when I said, don't worry so much about the energy transition. We all want to have electric cars. Just give us a chance. So build alliances, not enemies. And that's it. So thank you for being here. I think we have a minute for questions. So I'll see what questions.
I love this notion of appealing to family offices, many of which have a generational view. And certainly when I was working with a family in Switzerland, their mandate that they gave me was to think about, at least a 30-year horizon and a $20 billion investment strategy to, over 30 years, how would you ensure, right, that the family office and the family was secure and continuing in what its passionate was about, which was human health. What are we appealing to at the family office in terms of an investment return or a tax strategy? Or at the end of the day, they do want, while they are motivated by that generational mindset and doing something wonderful, they are also motivated to ensure appropriate returns so that family continues to be wealthy into the future. So again, I still think we're going to have to appeal to something with a family office that has something to do with returns or tax strategy, because they don't do it altruistically, right?
It's a great question. So the question is, yes, we can get family offices involved, but how do we motivate it? How do we make it worth their time and money? And the fundraising advice I've gotten over the years is the wealthy, the people with more than $20 million or $50 million, money is free for them. What's rare is making a difference. And that's what they want to do. So essentially the payback is gold stars. The payback, my hunch is the payback is going to be a tax credit, a charitable donation tax credit, because that's the government's way of giving you a gold star. I know it is for me when I get to do those deductions.
That's a great analysis. Maybe I'm happy to help take that on too.
Oh,
to understand the, there's been a drive in family offices towards impact investing, and it'd be interesting to see how those money flows are going versus the philanthropy of those same offices, right? I don't really know. I actually haven't done that analysis, so very interesting to see if what you're saying, if they're motivated right now by one or the other. I'm sure it's related to macroeconomic factors as well. But
yeah, when you have that kind of money, I have a friend who's affiliated with the UAE and their sovereign fund with God knows how many trillions of dollars. He says, Peter, money is free. That's not the issue. The issue is getting the consensus. And so in addition to having a core of family offices, again, family offices because it has to be stakeholders. Countries don't have children. But then we may want to have an associated group that does the marketing, right? Because we have to make sure that there's the publicity so that these family offices can stick out their chest and say, you know what, my name, the Fiekowsky office, was one of the 7 family offices that propelled climate restoration for 2 decades. That, in the U.S. we have the Carnegie libraries across the country. If you have the name Carnegie, you're probably very proud of what was done for humanity that way. So maybe it's that. Great questions. Thank you, Jen.
So on the panel, one of the things that was brought up was really the democratization, the small scale movements are really going to be the thing that drive change ultimately. And so when we talk about this funding process, I'm wondering what that funnel looks like to get the funds to the everyday people who don't have the bandwidth for fundraising or doing PR, who are the people offering and finding the opportunities to invest.
Any suggestions?
A lot, but I'm just wondering if those
Yeah.
like is there some significant thing that we can point to where people are already attempting that at any scale?
That's a good question. You know, my approach has always been the business advice of stick to your knitting. And so if you know me, I'm just focused on CO2 removal. And at this point, now that we did the math and said, you know, anything besides ocean fertilization in terms of CO2 removal is totally off the charts, 1,000 times too expensive. So I'm monomaniacal on funding the ocean fertilization. And the kind of broader things that you work at Dallas, and I forgot. Yeah.
I do. Yes.
Yeah. So the kinds of project that you're doing, that's out of my scope. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just want to complement your answer, or kind of answer. Yeah, well, what we are doing is, for example, with a small business, we are opening to crowdfunding. So you know these platforms of crowdfunding, WeFunder, that kind of platform. So that's how we personally in our company, I try to get involved with more broader base of finance. And that's what we maybe could be another solution, complemented by family offices. But what we are doing in our company right now is opening the company for crowdfunding, so we get involved almost everyone, because everyone can invest since $100, right? So and then the investment will be, in 3 years, will be 5 times, for example, right? So this is another way, as I said in the panel, to democratize this science and to be known, because I personally think that that's the way to do it.
Great, thanks. So, Chuck, I'll get to you in a second. Jen, would you be willing to sort of head up a little group to organize our family office strategy? I have no idea what that means, but I know that you love me and you'll say yes. So, if you're interested, if that's a domain that you want to get your fingers into, talk to me or Jen. Talk to Jen, but if you don't find her, most of you know me. Okay, Chuck.
Yeah, just tying into what you said, Hugo. There is a grandparents fund for the Climate Restoration Alliance, which is a crowdsourcing event, and the idea, and I'm one of the original people that is supporting that. But the idea is that by building that base, that crowdsourcing base, it then entices and encourages the big donors to come in. So exactly, and I'm proud to be one of the early ones in it. So it's like,
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity to do that, Peter.
Oh, you're welcome, Chuck. Thank you for standing up and being someone to do that. Let me just ask, given I've appointed Jen to head up some sort of a family office thing, who might be interested? Raise your hand just so your brain knows that you've raised your hand. Oh, great. Okay, good. Okay. And I'm getting the sign that it's time to move on. Okay, who's next? Oh, there you go.